Hey everyone, it's Lucid. We're going to be doing another Let's Play with the nation Bandar log. However, this is a very special Let's Play since we will be playing with a bunch of other YouTubers, and it's going to be a Disciples game, so that means there's going to be two people eternally locked into a team together. The way this particular game is set up is in general, each team, there's 5 teams, will have one YouTuber and then one of their friends. Though a couple of the teams, the friend is also a YouTuber, so for me, I'm playing with The Last Pretender, who I did a short duel with before. And the other YouTubers we're playing with are Sequani, which I probably mispronounced, Jay Breton, Nuclear Monkey, and Sai. And some of these guys like... and General Confusion, sorry. A lot of these guys are probably better than me, though I expect to put up a very good fight. And I have a shot at winning, so we will certainly try to take it. The game is going to be... So the game's happening now, but we'll upload it in the future. That way we cannot reveal things about diplomacy or research or things like that too far ahead of time. But we will be putting the game up on YouTube before it's finished. So there's still going to be things that... basically would be unfair to be revealed to the other players. So if you wouldn't mind, please do not communicate with me about what everybody else is doing, and please don't share what I'm doing with anyone else. That would be really good. We're not going to watch each other's videos until the game is over. So, this episode, we're going to talk about Bandar Log. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about Marignan, though if you watch... The Last Pretender's channel, you will probably get a much more thorough overview. After this, we'll do the Pretender design, which will be, in my case, a Disciple design, though we will also talk about, our Bless and Scales, which will really be my partner, Marignan's Pretender design. So we'll do both of those in the next episode. But for this one, we're going to be doing a national overview. And we've got a lot to cover, because Bandar Log not only has a lot of troops, you can see we've got a nice, full, healthy 2 rows, but we have a ton of summons. Possibly the most national summons of any nation. So there's a lot to cover, and we'll get right into it. Start off, we have a scout, very cheap, 20 gold, and it's stealthy 60, and it has mountain and forest survival. So very mobile and very stealthy, a very, very good scout. Very good scout. Cheaper than a normal scout and better. We have the Avadi Chieftain. I think you can get these guys in forests. I don't think you can get the monkey in forest, though I haven't really checked. But I think you can get this guy. He's basically superior to a commander in that he is stealthy and has forest survival, which is, you basically use indie commanders to move troops around. So he can lead stealthy troops and he can not be penalized by forest movement. So quite nice, but nothing too special. We have the Vanara Captain, which is 35 gold, so cheaper than a normal commander. And 60 leadership, which is kind of nice, but it's not going to give you any... This is really only good if you want to lead around more troops. It's not necessarily going to be good for giving a morale bonus or allowing you to put your troops in any kind of special formation. But for just basic troop movement, this guy's really, really cost efficient. Next, we have a very good commander, the Bandar Commander, 75 gold for an 80 leadership guy. This is going to give your very low morale troops a much needed morale bump, and it also allows you to put them into special formations. He also has force survival, as most of your units do. And all these guys are 1 commander point, which is kind of nice. Except for this guy now, he's 2 recruitment points. So... For a very big battle where morale is going to be very important, you may consider getting this guy because he has 120 leadership, which probably more important than leading more troops. It will allow you to give a bigger morale bonus to your troops, which is going to be very important on monkeys. So if you kind of form a doom stack or something like that, you probably want this guy in it. But for smaller squads, you probably don't want to waste the extra recruitment point. And having +2 morale instead of +1, not that big of a deal. Okay, now we get into the your mages and priests. This is your priest. So one of the problems with Bandar Log, they have good sacred troops, but they don't have, especially early in the game, very easy ways to bless them. This is your only preacher. Your only preacher. you have no other preachers. And fortunately, he's very cheap. He's only 1 recruitment point. And that's about all the good things I can say about him. You're going to be relying on this guy to bless all of your troops, so even though he sucks, he's your only preacher, and you're going to use him. Normally, in a game, you'll also have a prophet, who will be Holy 3, who can do battlefield-wide divine blessings for big fights. In a Disciples game, neither the Pretender nor the Disciple has that. So you have less options when it comes to blessing your troops, and you're more reliant on these guys. Next, we have the Yogi. Very cheap, 55 gold for 7 research points. Very, very efficient researcher, especially with magic scales. We're going to talk about Reincarnation in a minute. It's something I don't fully understand, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it. Probably before the series is over, I will have a much better knowledge about Reincarnation. But I know in Dominions 4, it was much more flavor. And I'll talk about it a little bit right now, but basically if you die in your own Dominion and you have experience, there's a chance you'll be reincarnated. And it seems to indicate that you could be reincarnated as a higher or lower form of life. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. Anyway, that aside, you have to have experience and you have to be in your own Dominion. We'll see if it happens, and right now I'm not going to really rely on it, because you're not going to really construct a strategy, I don't think, around this. It's more going to be incidental, where some of your guys will come back to life. I have done some test games where I've seen it happen, but it's not enough where I necessarily understand it very well, nor do I think it dramatically changes the balance of the nation, but I could be wrong. We will certainly see, because this will be the first long game I have played with Bandar Log. Okay, next we have the Gurus. Gurus, these and the Yogis you can recruit from any fort, and they're sacred too, so they're not priests, but both of these units are sacred, which is, on one hand is nice because they can get any kind of bless you have. On the other hand, it's a problem because you now have to build a temple to build guys that aren't even priests. So that's a little annoying. They're Astral 2, Nature 1. This is pretty interesting because Nature allows you to make very efficient communions because you can cast Personal Regeneration, which will make your communion slaves last a lot longer. And then Nature is a pretty damn good buff. So this means even though he's only Nature 1, you're going to be able to get up and do lots of big nature spells even without your cap-only mages as part of communions, like casting Mass Protection, Mass Regeneration, things like that in the late game. And then Astral's really, really good in the late game too. So these guys are super good. As we switch out of being gold constrained at the beginning, we'll probably start to get these guys. They're not as cost efficient research. These cost 64 gold a year to give you 11 research, whereas these guys cost you 22 a year to give you 7. So these guys, especially with magic scales, they're way more efficient in terms of upkeep. But at the beginning especially, we're not really concerned about efficiency. We just want to get our research number up. So once we have some, we'll probably recruit these guys at the beginning when we're gold constrained and we need to get infrastructure up. But once we have our infrastructure up and we maybe don't want to keep investing in more infrastructure for a little bit, we'll start recruiting these guys because they're going to be much more helpful on the battlefield, and they will also get our research going faster at the beginning. And this brings us to our cap-only mage, the Rishi. Again, basically the same stuff as everyone else. Sacred, but no holy paths. And has Reincarnation. Astral 3 with a chance at getting Astral, Earth, Water, or Nature, with a 10% chance of getting yet another one. But we'll just talk real quick about each of these cross paths. So if you get Water, this is going to be a clam forger. They can make clams, which will be quite nice on an astral powerhouse like this one. The Earth one is going to be able to make your crystal gear with the Earth Astral crosspath, so that's pretty useful. Also really good to put in communions. They can do things like Earth Power and then Iron Skin, which will make your slaves very, very hard to die either from fatigue or from other people casting stuff at them. The Astral ones will give you Astral 4, and Astral 4 is pretty important. Astral 4, you can climb very, very high up the Astral ladder. You cannot quite get all the way up to Astral 8, but you can get to... what is it? You can get all the way up to Astral 7. So anyway, Astral 4 is very important for climbing into Astral. It means you don't have to have super high Astral on your Pretender. And then Nature will give you Nature 3, which, importantly, you have the paths to make a Thistle Mace, and you also will have the paths to make a Moonvine Bracelet, so that will get you into Nature 5, which is a lot to cast. You don't really need to get that high into Nature to cast most of the important things like Mother Oak or Gift of Health. Gift of Health is 6 and will only be at 5, but you could make a Ring of Sorcery and that would get you the rest of the way. So basically the Nature random ones will be able to get you into the highest paths of Nature to do any of the things you need to do there. So a good unit, cap only, slow to recruit. Now we're going to get into the troops. Now, I'll probably do another national overview once I'm done, and I think I will be much more insightful then. But I have we'll talk about each unit and we'll think about them. And I've read guides on Bandar Log. I've played with them in a multiplayer once, but it was a duel. And I've tested them in single player to get ready for this game a little bit. So we'll talk about them. You basically have kind of 4 types of troops. One is the Markata, which are your little monkeys. The next are your Avadi, which are big monkeys. And they come in kind of a lower caste, which is the Avadi, and an upper class of essentially the same troop, but with armor, called the Vanara. And then we have the Bandars, and there's a lot of different flavors of Bandars. And then the 4th category is kind of our special troops, which we have 2 Sacreds, the Tiger Rider, which is cap only, the white one, which is a Sacred you can recruit anywhere, but he's kind of not that great, but he's cheap, and you can recruit him everywhere, so that's something. And then we have an Elephant, which does things that elephants do. And so we're going to try to talk about all of them. Now, we're probably going to have much more to say at the end, as I was saying, but one thing that's kind of cool, Bandar Log is based on Indian mythology, and as such, I mentioned these are all different castes. India has like a very strong caste system, and so anyway, it's kind of cool to think about like these are all different castes of units. The Markata, here we go. So 5 gold, very cheap, 1 resource, 3 recruitment points. You can mass them very quickly. On the cover, they look like they're really bad. They have a club. They're undisciplined. They can throw something that does no damage. And, yeah, their stats are pretty shitty, except for defense. Defense is actually pretty good. And they're size 1. So this actually makes some kind of interesting things. If you're size 1, there's 6 per square. And if you're high defense and you've got 6 per square, it means you're not going to get a harassed penalty. So what that effectively means is these guys actually, if the unit doesn't have terribly high attack or an AoE attack, these guys can tie up high damage elite troops for a long time while your other guys do stuff. I mean, they're going to die in droves, and they have really low morale, so they'll rout, but they'll tie up people for a long time. You have a short bow version, which is kind of cool. This is a little similar to like the pygmy archers that you have with Machaka. They have a short bow, very, very low damage, which is largely impacted by the fact they have very low strength. But it's a 5 gold short bow, right? That's not that bad, especially if you have a way to put flaming arrows on, which you can't really do naturally, but you can do it if you get it on your Disciple or Pretender. And that is something we're going to look to do, though I don't know if we'll use the Markata Archers. They also have really low morale, but pretty good defense. And for the same price as these other guys, you might as well kind of get these guys. I mean, they don't do any damage. They've got basically no melee damage, but these guys don't really do much damage either. So, and then 7, I think they both have 7 morale. These guys have 1 less defense. So you could just put a blob of these in the front and they could soak up a lot of elite damage and shoot some things for a little bit. I'm not sure which one. I mean, if that was the job, I might still use these guys. But next we move to the Avadi Archer, which is now a good short bow. Right, this is essentially the same short bow you would find on indies. It only costs 7 gold instead of 10, which is normally what a short bow would cost. So this is a very cost-efficient short bow, and by the way, he's stealthy, so he can pop up in a province where they weren't expecting there to be any archers, either when you're raiding or somewhere else. So not that bad. No armor. They kind of get torn to shreds by things, but if you have a bunch of arrow buffs, they can be kind of useful, and they can potentially raid. I haven't really tested raiding with these guys, so we'll have to see how it works, but I imagine 40 of them could pretty effectively kill PD. But they probably can't kill much more than that, unless they're buffed. Then we get the Vanara Archer, which is basically the same deal, except higher resources and 1 more gold. But they now have pretty good armor, and I think their morale is better. These guys are morale 8, right? And these guys are morale 9. So these guys actually can kind of do okay in hand-to-hand combat. Oh, I skipped over this guy, the Avadi Infantry. 7 gold, not great stats anywhere, really, but they are stealthy, and they have a mace, which does a fair amount of damage. And they have sticks and stones, and sticks and stones is a pretty important attack for this nation. They fire 2, right, so if you compare it to a crossbow where they fire every other round, this will fire 2 every round, so it's 4 times as much. And the range is proportional to their strength. And the damage scales directly with strength, unlike a crossbow. So you can see the damage this does is 7, which is their strength minus 3, which you see from there. So we'll come back to it, but these guys can be okay if you give them arrow buffs, and then they're okay when they get in combat, but we have better chassis. But anyway, just know this is here. The Vanara Archer, right, we just talked about, better version of an archer, is not stealthy though, so you can't really use it for stealthy raiding, but if you're going to do a pitched fight and you have resources, these guys are okay for that. Next we have the Vanara Chakram Thrower, and these guys, they have a chakra instead of the short bow, which basically means they can throw it as far as their strength. They only have 2 of them, and then they'll run into combat. So it's a lot like a javelin, but it's slashing instead of piercing damage. So if you buff these guys' strength, like if they got a +4 strength buff from Strength of the Giants, this will be a 20 damage attack, which is pretty high. And then this will be a 14 range, 14 damage attack. 18 damage attack, which is not bad. We have the Vanara Infantry, which is basically like this guy. He's got a mace and all of this, but he also has a shield, but he gives up his ranged weapon. And his defense is a little higher. And then we have the Vanara Swordsmen. Same deal, a little higher defense, higher damage weapon, I think. What is this guy? 18, yeah, so it's a 2 higher damage. So these are not really bad troops. 10 morale. Nothing to be ashamed of. Then we have our Bandar Light Archer, and these guys, 16 gold is not terribly expensive for a longbow, and it's a pretty high damage longbow because they have high strength. So 14 damage for a longbow is not bad at all. This can go through some pretty heavy armor with piercing. You have basically this unarmored version, and then you have an armored version, which honestly, if you're going to be spending the money on a longbow, you probably want to crank out the armored version, because they're kind of expensive. And they're quite good when they get in combat. So 21 damage is pretty damn high. So this would be a pretty viable unit. Yeah. Next, we have the Light Bandar Warrior. These guys are kind of cool. You can see they have sticks and stones. This is the only Bandar chassis that has sticks and stones. And again, 16 gold. Resource cost is pretty low, significantly lower, I think, than this guy, 23. They have pretty good armor, protection 10. I think, what did these guys have? Okay, these guys have protection 15, so they are higher armor than the Light Bandar Warrior. But they have this 21 damage mace, which does a lot. They don't have a hat, so they kind of get hurt a good bit more from archer fire than your other dudes. But they do have a buckler. And they have the sticks and stones attack, which, if you remember, scales directly with strength, unlike normal archery stuff. So, by default, their attack is 12, and the range is 15, which isn't that far. But if you remember, they also do 2 per turn. So, if we give them Strength of the Giants, though, or they get some kind of strength buff, this will be a 16 damage attack, which it's doing 2 of, which, you know, if you compare that to, let's say, this, I would rather, with a strength buff, this would be like 15 damage. So I would definitely rather have 2 15 damage or 16 damage attacks than 1 14. So in some ways, these are actually your best archers once you get some buffs up. This will also get flaming arrows. I'm quite pretty sure. I wouldn't promise it, but I've definitely done that in games. It definitely gets the graphic, and I think the damage proc also works. Yeah, so flaming arrows, pretty damn good. Wind Guide, they would benefit from, but these can be pretty good archers. And what's nice is once they're done doing their archer things, they're not bad in combat at all. They've got a lot of HP, which is a good stat to have. High strength, high damage weapon, and then some basic protection. You can't really be too upset. What's kind of weird is if you were to, let's say, make a ranged army, which is a mix of the Bandar Archer and the Light Bandar Warrior, the archers actually have better armor. So you would potentially want to put like the archers in front and these guys behind them, which would be very weird. I mean, you probably wouldn't actually do that. Then you have the Bandar Warrior. These guys, again, are pretty high resource costs, but have a very high damage weapon. This Iron Cudgel does 26 damage. It's a 2-handed weapon, and they have pretty good protection, 15 protection. If you're going up against elites that aren't super high attack, but instead, aren't super high defense, but instead are relying on protection, these guys can go, like if they have, you know, let's say they have 16 protection and they're thinking they're pretty special, these guys for 16 gold will tear up high protection units. So they're pretty good. Morale is, again, okay for all the Bandars, not great. Next we get this guy. He's basically the same as the other one, except he has a slightly lower damage thing. So if you're not and he has a buckler. So he will survive longer in combat, but the real question you have to ask if you're getting this guy, or this guy, is how high is the enemy protection? Like if the enemy has 20 protection, the difference between 21 and 26 damage is going to be huge, because that 20 protection is going to block most all the damage from this mace, but it's not going to block most all the damage from this Iron Cudgel. So anyway, it's basically, are you going versus like very high protection units, or sort of? Like if people had like 12 protection, you might go with this guy instead, because he'll take less damage incoming. And then we have the Swordsman, which is a high protection, a high damage thing. So this is kind of in between, not the full 26, but 24. And a slightly higher attack and a buckler. So again, a little more. This is pretty good, but higher resources. And I think he's more expensive too, yeah. 24 gold for the Royal Swordsman versus 16 for these guys. So I think cost efficiently, like I'd rather have, I think, 1.5 of these compared to one of these. But they are bodyguards, so if you're worried about assassinations, they can be good for that. And then we get to the white one, which is our first sacred, and it is pretty cheap, only 23 gold, but it kind of doesn't have great stats. Like if we ignore the sacred bit, it's 11 HP, that's not great. 14 protection is okay, but not great. Morale is okay. Defense is pretty good. Attack is pretty good. Strength isn't great. So nothing. This kind of screams like a normal human troop, or like a slightly better than normal human troop. But he's sacred. So if you have kind of a good bless, this guy can be pretty damn good. Anyway, yeah, it's an option. They're not really great, I don't think, for expanding, though I have seen people post where if you give them like a super powered bless, you can get these guys to expand pretty efficiently. That is not what we're going to be doing, but we will be recruiting, I think, a fair amount of these once we get forts up. Next, we have the War Elephant. The War Elephant is very expensive, 100 gold, but it's basically, after that, an elephant, low morale, not great protection, size 6, ton of HP, low defense. And I'm not horrible with elephant scripting, but I'm not great. And I had found, so you can use these guys to expand. If you don't have any bless, they might be your most efficient expansion option, but in my tests anyway, and I totally could be wrong on this, I have found that the Tiger Riders make for better initial expansion. Because basically they have higher defense and better protection, and they have 2 forms, and they tend to kill stuff a little faster, and they don't get surrounded. The real problem with elephants is they get surrounded, and then they get hit on all sides, and they tend to die actually pretty quick. So, versus mobs of Indies, you probably don't want to use these guys, though they could be situationally useful against players. And then, yeah, so now we're on the Tiger Rider. These guys have 2 forms. The first form is this guy, white one on top of a tiger, and they have 3 attacks, which is pretty good. They're pretty high damage attacks. And then they basically have similar protection to the white one, though with better defense skill. When they die, they turn into a tiger, and they basically lose the Falchion attack, but I think they get more HP too. They're also sacred. So if the tiger survives the battle, though, he's gone. They don't respawn, they don't stick around after the battle, it's just game over. Which is a little unfortunate because a lot of the commanders that have mounts, you get to keep the mount afterwards. Or a lot of units which have mounts, you get to keep the mount afterwards if the unit on top dies. Not the case here, but regardless, these guys are pretty good killing machines. They do not survive heavy assault or a lot of damage, but they can dish a lot of damage out, and that's useful. And we've covered the basic units now, and it's 27 minutes into the game, or into this episode, but I haven't even started on all of the summons. And rather than make a 40-minute episode, I think we're going to have 2 parts for our national overview. And in the second part, when you tune back in, we're going to cover all of the national summons. So thank you all for watching, and I will talk to you next, I'll see you next episode. So take care.